It's Mom. Pete smiled as he took the phone from his daughter. He had a pretty good idea of what this conversation was going to be about, but it was his first conversation with his wife that morning, so he was looking forward to it. He heard his wife, Joan, say, "Hey baby, can my sweet teddy bear oversee a dozen teenagers today? I'd like to think I can handle this. Eva and the girls have been planning this for a couple of weeks, so all I have to do is follow their instructions. She and her friends are 19 or 20, so it isn't like I'm trying to shepherd a bunch of toddlers." She asked, "Did you get the pool all set up the way she wanted it?" He replied, "Yes, yes. In the lounge chairs, in the bar, in the grill. The food is prepped. I did all that while you've been gone. Next year, you get to play chaperone." "Huh, don't tell me you haven't been looking forward to this. There will be a dozen teenagers in bikinis around you all afternoon. I'm willing to bet by the time I get home, you'll be all ready for me. Well, don't forget one of those is our daughter, and 2 more of them are like surrogate daughters. I don't need to be around a dozen bikini-clad teenagers to be ready for you. I'm ready for you all the time, every day. I know you are, and I like that." He asked, "Did you have a good trip?" She replied, "We did. It was a good learning conference." Joan worked for a mid-sized investment firm in a Nashville, Tennessee suburb. She was a senior investment advisor and had worked there for nearly 6 years. "That's great, sweetie. Have a safe trip back from San Jose." "Thanks. I'll see you later this afternoon." "Love you, Joan." "Love you, Pete." Eva rolled her eyes at her dad, though truthfully, she was happy that her parents still loved each other as much as they did. She hoped she would be as in love with her spouse after 25 years of marriage. Pete was in his own mind for a moment too. Teddy bear. He had been lover until the kids were born. Then he was daddy until their oldest went to college. He's been her teddy bear ever since. He didn't mind it too much. She certainly liked snuggling next to him, and she told him that she loved sleeping with and then next to her teddy bear, so who was he to complain? He and his daughter, and her 2 best friends, had been busy for a couple of days getting everything ready for the party. It was only 2 weeks before she and her friends' college classes started, junior year for most of them. Eva wanted a big party before most of them drove off to other parts of the Southeast. She was starting her junior year studying medicine at Vanderbilt University, which is about 20 miles north of her parents' house in Franklin, Tennessee. She lived with her longtime best friends in an on-campus apartment. She was a very cute girl and, like her mother, was about 5'6" and curvy. Lily and Carrie, the above-mentioned best friends, spent the night and had been helping that morning also. Lily was a tall, slender, and very attractive African-American with very pretty light pecan brown-colored skin and wonderfully long, curly hair. At 5'10", she was a good inch taller than Pete, for which she teased him mercilessly. He didn't mind. He loved her and loved having her around. She was like a sister to Eva and another daughter to him. She and his daughter had been as thick as thieves since 3rd grade. She was on a track and field scholarship at Vanderbilt, which paid for a portion of her tuition. She ran the 800-meter, 1,500-meter, and the mile. When she was younger, she would run some with Pete, but as she got older, he told her he couldn't run with her anymore because he was holding her back. She missed running with him. She was a very smart young lady and was majoring in math and computer science. Carrie, Eva's other best friend, was the first friend Eva made on her first day of elementary school. Carrie had dropped her sandwich that their housekeeper had made for her, and Eva gave her half of hers because her parents had always taught her to help others. When Lily came along, they became their version of the 3 Musketeers because they were nearly inseparable. Carrie only made a 1,300 on her SATs, but with her parents' money and old money connections, she still got into Vanderbilt. They teased her that she could have scored a 600, and she still would have been admitted. As a prank in high school, rather than being voted most likely to succeed, or some other useless award, she was voted most likely to buy an island. She was a little blonde doll, with a cute figure on her tiny 5'2" frame. They were a good group, like 3 sisters, and Pete loved having the 3 of them there with him. Under the backyard pavilion and outdoor kitchen, attached to the side of the 2-story pool house, all of which was mostly built by Pete over the years, they had the table ready to serve lunch, and the rest of their friends should be showing up any minute. It was a gorgeous August day, and the lounge chairs were set up, the pool was clean, and Pete had mowed and manicured the yard. Eva seemed to have inherited her mother's organizing and event planning abilities, and she had kept her father moving the last 2 days. She was his little girl, and she bragged on him when she had the chance. He tended to be more bashful than boastful, and was very assured of his capabilities, but not braggadocios about them. She guessed building and running his small consulting firm would do that for some men. Not that what other men did mattered to her. She knew the fathers of most of the girls coming over, and if there were a vote amongst them as to who had the best dad, hers would likely get a majority of first-place votes. After helping serve a lavish spread of food and non-alcoholic drinks, Pete said, "Okay, ladies, I'm going back inside. Let me know if you need anything." Lily asked, "Are you sure you don't want to stay out here and eat with us?" "Thanks, Lily. This is for all of you to enjoy. I'm good." This afternoon was for them, girls only. He had kept himself busy in his office, out of which he could see the pavilion and a portion of the pool. Once the girls had started taking off their cover-ups and clothes to reveal their swimsuits, he moved around to the den to watch the Braves lose another game, because he didn't want to appear to be a creeper. He had been watching for about 20 minutes when he heard a commotion out by the pool. Standing to investigate, he saw a large young man grabbing Carrie's wrist and trying to pull her away from her friends who had surrounded the two of them and were yelling for him to stop. Pete ran outside, and as he approached the group, he yelled, "Hey, a-hole. Let her go." The big guy, probably around 6'3", saw Pete and smirked, not even bothering to slow as he dragged a resisting Carrie towards the exit. Little Carrie didn't even weigh 115 pounds, and he was probably twice her weight. As Pete got closer, a-hole pushed Lily out of the way, and as she stumbled, Pete tried to catch her, but with her tall frame, she bumped into his nose, hard. For a second, he saw stars, but then recovered, and he ran to get between Carrie, the intruder, and the gate leading towards the driveway. "Let me go, Ricky," yelled Carrie. "Girls, get back." All the other girls moved away from the three people involved in the altercation, but they didn't go far. Some had their phones out filming. "I said, let her go, a-hole," yelled Pete. Pete stepped in close to Ricky, who decided that having 6 inches and 60 or 70 pounds on Pete meant that he didn't have to worry much about him. Since his right hand was holding Carrie's wrist, he tried to throw a left jab at Pete. That was his first mistake. Pete dodged low, and with some momentum behind him, put a solid punch into Ricky's solar plexus. A big whoosh of air rushed out of his mouth, and he hunched back, absorbing the blow and releasing Carrie. Not wasting any time, Pete put a hard knee to Ricky's nuts, which took him down to his hands and knees. "Get the hell out of my backyard, a-hole." Ricky slowly got to his feet and said, "You aren't as big as my old man said you were. I'm going to enjoy slapping you around." The big guy prepared to take another swing at Pete, but it was telegraphed so far in advance that Pete had to wait before he could respond. It was clear this guy didn't have any training, thankfully. As Pete ducked under the big roundhouse right hook, he put his right foot behind a-hole's right leg and shoved as hard as he could. Ricky was already off balance from the missed swing, and he fell backwards over Pete's leg, landing with a hard thud onto his back. When Pete said, "Just leave. I don't want to have to hurt you," several of the young ladies giggled at the shorter man threatening the outmatched giant. Those giggles weren't helping. As Ricky climbed to his feet, he said, "You move pretty good for a teddy bear, but my dad calls you a little teddy bear." Pete was wondering where he got his information. How would he know about it? Ricky came for him again, but now Pete was getting pissed. He knew he needed to end this before he lost his temper and his self-control. Ricky tried to fake a right jab, but did it poorly. When he threw a left jab, Pete dodged it. What Pete was waiting for was what came next. Another right hook that seemed to start down in Birmingham and slowly whizzed by Pete's head. As Ricky's arm went past Pete's head, he stepped in and delivered a devastating combination to a-hole's right side where his kidney and liver are located. Pete thought that was probably the hardest he had ever hit anyone with his hands. Ricky dropped like a stone. It took a solid 45 seconds just to get to his hands and knees. Nobody was giggling anymore. As he pushed himself onto his knees and prepared to stand, Pete grabbed one of a-hole's hands, bent it behind his back, and put enough pressure on his fingers to almost break them. Once on his feet, Pete marched Ricky through the still open gate and pushed him out onto the driveway. After Pete let him go, Ricky was moving like an old crippled man holding his side. Ricky had enough fighting, but he wasn't done talking. "You may call your wife your sweetie, but my dad calls her his sweet kitty." Surprised? "Oh, just because she tells you she's traveling doesn't mean she is. Sometimes they stay in town so she can enjoy his big tool uninterrupted for a couple of days close to home." Pete said, "Yeah, right. If you want to keep talking smack about my wife, we can step back into the backyard. Keep yapping, a-hole. Anyway, I wouldn't believe you even if you said you had proof. Now that you're embarrassed, all you have is lies." "Oh, we'll see about that. I'll believe it when I see it in my hand." And Pete pointed to his hand. "Even then, you'll probably have someone fake it." Ricky just smirked at Pete. Looking around, Ricky found Carrie's Mercedes and banged the hood of her SUV hard enough with his fist to dent it. It was then that Pete finally noticed the sounds from all the other girls yelling and gesturing at the young man. He had been so focused a few moments ago that he didn't hear them. Ricky slumped into his BMW and left. When Pete turned around, he saw several young ladies making very unladylike gestures towards Ricky and several cell phones filming the activities. Pete said, "Come on, ladies, the show is over. Back inside. Also, please do not share that video with anyone yet. Let's talk about it for a few minutes first, okay?" He heard Eva say, "Daddy, your nose is bleeding." In the next instant, Lily was barking orders to everyone to make room for Pete on a chaise lounge chair under one of the umbrellas. "Eva, go get him a clean shirt. Carrie, go get him a bag of ice." She got him sitting down and began pulling his shirt off to hold against his nose. The remaining 10 girls all got a really good look at this very fit and lean man in his late 40s. They never would have expected what they just witnessed. At that moment, Pete had nearly a dozen bikini-clad nurses ever so willing to help him, though with Lily running things, that was unlikely to happen. One of them ran to the pavilion to get him something to drink. Another was trying to ease him back so that he could lie down. The rest were chattering away about what happened and staring at Pete. When Carrie and Eva returned, he put the ice on his nose and asked, "Who the hell was that a-hole? Who raises a piece of shit like that?" "Carrie, what did he want with you?" Eva stepped in to answer the first two. "That a-hole, as you like to call him, is Ricky Farmington, the son of Andrew Farmington, Mom's boss." "Oh, shit." Those earlier accusations just went from some stupid kid talking smack to maybe a stupid kid that knows something. Shit, shit, shit. He didn't want to let his concern be known to Eva nor the others. Carrie said, "The reason he was after me was because we went out one time, a couple of weeks ago, and when he asked me out again, I declined. I tried to do it nicely, but he wasn't very nice about it. I'm sorry he came here. I'm not sure how he found me, but I'm guessing one of the crew here put today's party on social media." She looked at her friends and pleaded, "Please stop doing that." Then looking back at Pete, she asked, "Mr. Clark, how did your nose start bleeding?" "He never touched you." Pete said, "I think that was from when I tried to catch my other daughter, Lily. She fell into me, and the side of her head hit my nose." He smiled at Lily. "I'm so sorry, Dad." Lily had called him Dad for several years. "When he pushed me, you were so close, and when you tried to catch me, we got tangled up. I didn't mean to bump your nose." Pete squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, it wasn't your fault. It doesn't feel broken, just sore." Lily was pleased to hear that. "Worried about the videos," Pete said. "I know this is asking a lot of all of you, but please don't share a video of what happened with anyone outside of this group. No posting to social media, no emails, no texting to your friends. Nothing. Please." "Why, Daddy? You didn't do anything wrong. From the looks of things, you could have really hurt him if you wanted to," said a curious Eva. He replied, "In the first place, I don't want any of those smears regarding your mother being posted out there. We know they aren't true, but they still wouldn't sound good. Also, someone with that kind of temper could try to retaliate against Carrie or me or any of us if that video were posted online or started getting around. Don't you see? He would be embarrassed and want some payback. He still might. But I'd hate for one of you to be leaving a movie theater or college class at night and have him sneak up behind you and hurt you because he was angry and stupid or drunk. Sure, he would be arrested later, but with a temper like that, he could be dangerous and do some permanent damage." Eva asked, "Are you going to call the police?" "I'm afraid so. We don't have to decide about pressing charges right now, but he assaulted Carrie and Lily and tried to assault me." A couple of girls giggled at Ricky's attempt to assault the smaller man. He also damaged the hood of Carrie's SUV, not to mention trespassing, and I'm sure other things. "I'll get someone to come out and take our statements. It shouldn't take long. I'm sorry, but we need to do this. You can still lay out by the pool and have your party." He asked, "Carrie, is your wrist all right?" "Yeah, I think so." He grabbed it pretty hard, so it might bruise, but nothing else. Pete nodded. Carrie asked, "Mr. C, where did you learn how to do that?" "Ricky is a big guy and in good shape. I know he's won several fights. It's kind of boring. You sure you want to hear this?" A dozen bikini-clad ladies were nodding their heads up and down. Not a bad sight to watch. Pete shrugged. "When I was in high school, I was teased occasionally about my height. Both of my parents are short, too, so I knew that wasn't likely to change. I was always in good shape because I ran track in junior high and later cross country in high school. I was pretty good too, competing in the state finals. But one night when I was a junior, I had a date with a nice girl, and as we were leaving the movie theater, a couple of big a-holes, like Ricky, wanted to harass us. They did for a minute, and I tried to ignore them and push my way through. Being on a date, I didn't want to start anything, so I let them push me a little. Fortunately, I had a couple of friends that were there too. They saw what was going on, joined us, and the two a-holes left. We finished our date, and I went home. I was more than a little angry. I told my dad about it, and the next day he found a martial arts studio for me near their home in Knoxville. He told me, "Be the best you can be, but if you ever get good, don't go looking for trouble. Defense of you and others only." I promised, and I took 2 lessons every week until I went to college at Georgia Tech. While in college in Atlanta, I found a studio that taught several other disciplines including silent, a close combat style, as well as judo and jiu-jitsu. They didn't ascribe to any single style, and their focus was on self-defense. I trained there my 4 years in college. The instructor was a really old guy about my height, and his daughter was about Eva's size in her late 30s. He led the school, along with his daughter, and she was the most amazing fighter I've ever seen, fast, fearless, and deadly. I watched her spar against big, fast guys with black belts, and it was rare they ever laid a hand on her, and when they did, they usually wished they hadn't. I knew I wanted to learn from her. So, for 4 years, I took 2 to 4 lessons per week. I was pretty good for a while. He was being modest. When I married Joan, we still lived in Atlanta, but I cut back to 1 lesson per week. The entire time we've been married, she's never seen me in a match. She knows I practice in our basement gym, but that's it. Eva, when you started college a couple of years ago, I found a local studio and began studying again. I'm not as good as I was, but I do okay. Eva said, "Daddy, I never knew. You didn't need to, sweet pea. Do you remember when we took you and Donnie to Paris when he was in 9th and you were in 7th grade? She nodded. Do you remember that night we drove out to that Moroccan restaurant in the shady-looking section of the city? She nodded again. I told your mother that I didn't want to go there because I thought it wasn't a safe place to go at night. Of course, she disagreed. The discussion was a little heated after a while, but I finally relented, like I usually do. It was a great restaurant. I enjoyed it, but do you remember what happened on our way back to the car? Eva answered. Those 2 guys, a tall one and a short one, came up behind us and yelled at us to stop. You gave Mom the car keys and told her to take us to the car, started, and began honking once we were inside. That's right. While the 3 of you got away, I was planning to stop them or slow them down. If I wasn't there right away, I knew she would call the police, though I wondered how long it would have taken for them to show up in that part of town. After you guys left, the tall one pulled out a knife and said, "Money." I doubt he spoke much English besides that. I held my hands up like I didn't want any trouble, but eventually he got close enough that I had to take him on. I kept him between me and the short guy. Pretty quickly, I took his knife from him and put it into the side of his knee. I'm surprised you guys didn't hear the scream he let out. When the short guy pulled his own knife, I hit him, and his knife fell away from us. Well, the tall guy screaming aroused the curiosity of several of their friends, who started running towards us. At this point, I started running towards the car hoping you guys were in it. I felt in control with the first 2 guys, but with 6 or 7 more coming my way, I thought discretion was the better part of valor. So, it was time for me to leave. I sprinted towards the car, and when I heard the horn, I made a beeline for it. Your mother had pulled onto the street and was ready to go. I hopped into the front seat and told her to punch it. Since she and I have been married, that is the only other time I faced anything like that before today. That was a little fib. What he didn't tell them was that one time after Donnie and Eva were born, just before they moved to Nashville, he and Joan were out dancing one night when they still lived in Atlanta, and one of her former boyfriends from college, Bobby Taylor, then an Atlanta Falcons football player, approached them. Joan didn't think anything about it, but when he asked Joan to dance and she accepted, Pete was fuming. They only danced a few minutes, but later when Pete saw him go into the restroom, he followed. In the restroom, the jock, a wide receiver who was about the same height as Ricky, smirked at Pete and started making some comments about how he missed Joan and maybe they would dance a little more that evening. Pete wasn't in the mood. As the old flame was about to try and push Pete out of the way to leave the restroom, Pete put him on the floor, hard. The big guy fell at an odd angle, landed on his arm, and broke his ulna bone at the elbow, which ended his playing time for that season. The Falcons brought in a replacement, who did so well that Bobby was later traded to another team. No charges were filed. Pete continued with Eva's friends, so please everyone, don't send that video to anyone. By the end of the day, there should be exactly 13 copies, including me, and never more than that. They all promised Pete they wouldn't send it to anyone. He hoped they meant it. I know this kind of dampens the mood, but you shouldn't let it. He's an a-hole. Forget him. Lily said, "You mean he's an a-hole?" Pete smiled and some of the girls laughed. He stood and returned inside to call the police. When the officer arrived, he was rewarded with all those lovely ladies in their swimsuits. They quickly covered up, and he asked them to explain what happened. He examined Carrie's wrist, seeing it was still red, but no more injured than that. Pete's nose had stopped bleeding, and he had changed. Carrie's mom had come over because her dad wasn't back yet from a trip. The entire discussion only took 30 to 40 minutes. Once the police car pulled away, the party resumed. Carrie hugged her mom and watched her drive away also. Eva came up to Pete and asked, "Dad, would you mind if we stayed here until we go to Carrie's? We'd planned on going out dancing after dinner, but after this afternoon, we'd prefer to dance here, tonight. It's your house, Eva. You know I don't mind. I love having you here." She hugged her father and returned to her friends. Pete caught the last inning of the Braves game. They were losing, of course. While watching, he received a text from Joan. Plane was delayed. We'll be home late. He sighed. That little seed of doubt was starting to bother him, and he hated that. Some of Ricky's words were too close to home. He needed his wife to get home so they could talk. Pete danced with a few more of Eva's friends, or more accurately, they were dancing with him. They tried to teach him the electric slide, again, but he couldn't ever quite get it right, which amused everyone, including Pete. Around 10 p.m., they needed to get to Carrie's, whose huge house had a ton of bedrooms. Pete received very nice hugs, kisses, and thank yous from all the young ladies as they left. Having had a little help, it didn't take much to clean up outside. As he was putting the last of the trash into the trash bins, he heard the garage door open. Joan was home. He walked out to help her with her bag, and she gave him a big hug and quick kiss on the lips as he approached. She said, "I missed you, baby. How was the party?" "It was interesting. I'll tell you about that in a minute. They just left to go to Carrie's for the night." "Oh, I thought they were going out dancing." He said, "They decided to dance here. I'm sure you minded that. Did you turn off the lights and watch them from inside?" That irritated him a bit, but he replied, "No. Lily pulled me outside with her, and I danced with most of them before they left." "Well, I'll bet you're in quite the mood. If I weren't so wiped out from the cross-country flight and the delays, I'd be happy to take care of you." Pete wasn't really in the mood either. He said, "Let me get your bag inside, and I'll pour you a glass of wine. I have quite the story to tell you." She was curious regarding what had happened and followed him in. Once he returned to the living room, she was sipping her wine and watched him sit across from her, rather than by her. "Oh, this must be serious," she snickered. Pete proceeded to describe what happened, including calling the police but leaving out the dialogue from Ricky. She was shocked that someone could be so brazen as to just barge into their backyard and attack sweet Carrie. Then Pete revealed the name of the assailant. "His name is Ricky. Ricky Farmington. Andrew's Ricky." Shock, then disbelief, crossed Joan's face. "No way. I cannot believe he would do that. There must be some mistake." Pete said, "Clearly, Andrew forgot to teach him a few things." Then he thought to himself, like manners, respect, how to fight, and when to keep his big trap shut. Joan thought for a second. "Wait a minute. Ricky's huge. You mean to tell me that you took him out of the backyard, like trash?" She giggled for a moment. Then she giggled some more, and then she started laughing. "What?" she said. "You're making this up, right? My husband. All 165 pounds of you beat up that tank? He looks like he's almost twice your size." "Okay, what's the joke?" Pete was not as amused. She could see his disappointed expression and said, "Oh, come on, Pete. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but be realistic here." Pete stood and said, "Good night, Joan. Don't pout, sweetie. I don't mean that badly." How else could he take it? "I'll be there as soon as I finish this glass." She was shocked when he replied, "Don't bother." While Joan went into the kitchen to put her glass in the sink, she called to him, but he didn't reply. When she got upstairs to their bedroom, he wasn't there. He was in a guest room. She asked, "Pete, what are you doing in here?" "I missed you and was planning on snuggling with my teddy bear tonight." Teddy bear. Now he wondered about the origin of her using that pet name. Was it a term of endearment or derision? He could blow up over her use of the term right then, but he was emotionally exhausted and wanted a fresh mind to think things through in the morning. He said, "Well, then I guess we'll both be disappointed." Then he closed the door and locked it. After a few minutes of knocking and pleading, she finally left and went to their bedroom, confused at the turn of events. Her husband must be losing his mind, she thought. She considered texting her daughter to find out more, but it was late, and she would see her in the morning. Besides, no way could her husband do what he said. It wasn't possible. The next morning, Pete knew she would sleep late after the long flight and being on West Coast time for a couple of days. He wondered if she even went on a trip, which irritated him because now he was questioning everything. He snuck into their bedroom and retrieved some clothes for running and later changed for his run and ate a small breakfast. When he heard her beginning to stir, he went for a long run. 7 miles and just under 53 minutes later he returned. When he walked in the door, Joan did not look happy. "Mister, we need to talk. I don't think you gave me the whole story last night." He ignored her and went to the shower. She was following, but once in the bathroom he locked the door behind him. She beat on the door, but he continued with his shower and shave. Once dressed and feeling refreshed, he prepared to face his wife. He went downstairs to go into his home office. She was already waiting for him. "Andrew called me this morning. I'm not sure I got the entire story last night. Ricky had blood in his pee and had to go to the emergency room late yesterday. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy." She said, "Ricky told Andrew that he was here just talking to Carrie when out of nowhere you came up behind him and hit him in the back with something. They think you bruised a kidney. Andrew wants to file charges." Pete replied, "Why am I not surprised that the little a-hole is lying about the incident? He's probably embarrassed that your little teddy bear threw him out, as you said, like garbage. Andrew's very angry. Why did you do that? Why did you attack him?" "The reason I attacked that poor boy was because he was attacking Carrie. You know, the Carrie that we love like our own daughter and have for over a decade. The Carrie that we took with us and Eva and Lily to Spain for 2 weeks to celebrate Eva's and their high school graduation. That same Carrie was being dragged out of our backyard by that unrespectful piece of shit, and I put a stop to it." "Are you saying that you believe their story and not your husband? Do you believe I sucker punched him?" Joan said, "I'm sorry, Pete. No way could you do that face to face." Pete wanted to throw in her face how in the hell did that stupid kid know the things he knew. Pete was furious that he had to let that slide for now because all he had was a bunch of hearsay from Ricky, and not enough to accuse her of anything without her easily being able to sidestep the accusation. And if true, she would be more careful in the future. The whole situation stunk. But if the accusations were true, then they were finished. "So, you don't believe that I could do it face to face, man to man? No offense, honey. I love you like no one else, but he's huge and you're in great shape, but you're no match for him. Remember Paris? You were running as fast as you could with that little guy chasing you trying to get to the car before he caught you. That was after I took care of the big guy. He was never going to catch me, and I was running because..." Pete stopped. This was pointless. It was already clear what she thought of him. Regaling his hard-fought and won battles wouldn't do any good. He could see it was already a lost cause, likely in more ways than one. She continued, "Do you have any idea how difficult this is going to make life for me?" That surprised Pete. "Oh, excuse me. What was I supposed to do? Would you rather I have used a gun? I would like to know what you hit him with." "My hands," he replied. "Bullshit. I've seen you work out in our basement gym. You go after the bag pretty good, but I don't see how you could have hurt Ricky by just hitting him. How could you have gotten a clean shot, unless you snuck up on him? Thanks for the faith, babe. It's confidence inspiring. In case you didn't pick up on it, that was sarcasm." Exaggeratedly, she rolled her eyes and groaned. "Oh, come on. That's not helping. What do I tell Andrew?" "You tell him that he raised his piece of shit son to be an a-hole, apparently, just like him, and that Ricky needs to apologize to Carrie and to me." "I will not. Ricky told him what happened, and it sounds like he didn't do anything wrong." Pete shook his head. "You must be delusional if you believe him over your husband. Did Andrew give you drugs while you were traveling?" Joan's face flamed at that comment and was about to reply when they heard a vehicle drive up and honk the horn. Thankful for the reprieve, they stood to see who was there. It was a big Bentley, and out of the vehicle exited Eva, Lily, Carrie, and her dad, Brian. All three of the girls ran up and hugged Pete and then Joan. A moment later, Brian came up and shook his hand. "Pete, I want to thank you for looking after Carrie. It means a lot to me that you would do what you did. She's everything to me. I'll be forever grateful." Pete shrugged his shoulders, uncomfortable with the praise. "You know we love Carrie. No way was I letting that shit leave with her. Wasn't going to happen. You would have done the same. Brian nodded his head, and Joan piped up, "Girls, would you please explain to me what happened? I'm getting conflicting versions of events from what Ricky told his dad and what Pete is telling me." Eva asked, "You're getting two different stories, and you don't believe Dad?" Well, not that, exactly. That's not what I'm saying. I'd just like to hear it from someone else. It all sounds so, I don't know, preposterous." Pete shook his head and went back inside. He wouldn't be there long. While the girls described the whole scene to Joan, Pete was grabbing his laptop and an overnight bag. He was getting away before he said something that he couldn't take back. He needed time to determine what he was going to do next. When Pete walked back outside, Brian, Carrie, and Lily were gone, and Joan was stunned. How could her husband have done that? Seeing the shock on his wife's face told him how far he had fallen. When combined with her focus on how all this affected her and her work, not him, his daughter, or Carrie, it spoke volumes. Pete asked, "So, what are we going to do about that a-hole? Someone needs to teach him some manners." Joan scoffed, "And you think you're going to be the one to do it?" Pete couldn't believe it. She just heard 3 people corroborate his story and she still didn't think he was capable of handling that a-hole? She must think her husband's some kind of a coward, she said. He's probably pretty pissed. Pete smirked, thinking how Ricky was probably still pissing some blood. What she said next killed him. "I don't think you'd be so lucky next time." The look on Pete's face told her she had gone too far. She meant it and was just trying to protect her husband from getting hurt. How could he take on such a big, strong, young man directly? She watched as his face morphed from one of complete shock to being filled with fury. "When did you lose all respect for me as a man, Joan? What? You didn't used to treat me this way. You used to have some faith in me. I see that's gone now. You're being ridiculous. My feelings for you haven't changed. I'm proud of you and everything we've done together. Well, call me skeptical. Did you know that I have C-level people from several Fortune 500 companies in my contacts app? These people call me and my company when they need help. That's how I make our living. My company may not make as much as Andrew's, but my people and I get a hell of a lot of respect within our industry. Apparently, a lot more respect than I get at home. These last couple of days have been very educational when it comes to what you think of me. What does that mean? Not for you to worry about. I've made a decision. If that piece of shit, either one, him or his father, isn't here tomorrow at 6 p.m. to apologize to me and Carrie, then Brian and I will call the police and press charges. He needs to pay for the hood of her SUV also. You can't be serious. I still have to work with Andrew. Well, maybe you can convince him that he should teach his son some manners and that he should respect others. Clearly, he hasn't learned that from his dad, but I'm sure you know that by now since you have to spend so much time around him. Pete, this could hurt my job. Well, Joan, look at what this is doing to us, but it doesn't appear that you see it that way. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., or Brian and I are calling the police. I'm going out for a while. No, you aren't. We aren't finished talking about this. We are finished, and I need to get away from you. I'm going over to Brian's to discuss this. I'm not calling that a-hole's father. Since he listens to you, you can tell him what his kid must do to avoid jail time. Clock's ticking. Pete, come back here. He ignored her, walked into the garage, placed his bag into his car, and drove away with Joan standing there with her hands on her hips and an exasperated expression on her face. Pete had never done anything like that. While driving to Brian's, Pete also decided that he needed to do some traveling for his business. What he feared was that based on his wife's reaction and hers and Ricky's comments, she had already succumbed to Andrew. Traveling would get him away from her and give him a little time to see exactly how involved she was with Andrew. At this point, he believed that stupid kid. Damn it, Joan. Brian and Pete talked and agreed upon 6 p.m. tomorrow, or they would call the police. Pete went to a local hotel and sat at the desk and worked with the Braves game playing in the background. Around 5 p.m. his phone rang. He had blocked Joan's phone and the home phone, so he could have some peace. He wondered who it was. Eva. Hey, baby. Hey, Daddy. She said, I'm driving back to the apartment. Are you nearby? At Vanderbilt, Eva shared an apartment with Carrie and Lily on campus. All Vanderbilt undergrads are required to live on campus. The 3 of them, undergraduates, being together in one of those very nice apartments was an unusual arrangement when campus housing requests seemed to be decided by random rolls of the dice. Supposedly, there is a very convoluted selection process for getting into one of those coveted apartments. He guessed that Brian simply asked how much he needed to donate to the university to make it happen, and it happened. Brian and his wife were born into money, a lot of old-school money, and he had also done very well in entertainment law there in Nashville. He came from a long line of Williamsons and had contributed significantly to the Williamson Medical Center in the Williamson County seat of Franklin, Tennessee. Pete answered her. I am. I'm at the residence and near the mall. Room 413. I'll be there in a few minutes. 10 minutes later, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, Eva hugged him fiercely. I don't understand, Daddy. Why doesn't Mom believe us? I'd say she doesn't think very highly of my ability to protect my family. Eva said she should. I told her about Paris. Pete shrugged. Let me guess. She didn't believe you. Eva shook her head, and he could see a tear leak from her eye. He said, I'm sorry, baby. Maybe Great Big Andrew convinced her that I don't quite measure up. I don't know. You don't believe what that a-hole said, do you? For the second time, what he wanted to say was that he thought the reason that Joan had lost all respect for him as a man was because she was likely screwing someone a lot bigger than he was. He wanted to tell his daughter that it appeared that her mother was a 304, but he didn't say that. He said, no, he was just talking smack. Pete hated lying to his daughter, but he didn't want her thinking those things about her mother. It may turn out that they are true, and while things didn't look good, it was just speculation for the moment. Don't worry, sweetie. Everything is going to be fine. You'll see. She replied, I want to believe you, Daddy, but I'm worried. Don't be. We'll be okay. She wondered if he meant her and him, or their family. A few minutes later, she left. School would begin in a couple of weeks, and she had her summer internship at the University Medical Center that had a few more days left. The next day, he checked his home security app on his phone to see when the garage doors opened and closed, signaling when Joan had left for work. The good thing about running your own small consulting company was that when you weren't traveling, you could work from your home office. The bad thing about that was when you were having a fight with your wife, you couldn't escape to the office. Finally, at lunchtime, he checked his messages. He had 20 texts from his wife, some of them quite long. Most of them were about his being unreasonable. The last one said, when? He'll be there at 6. I left you a voicemail. When he checked his voicemail, he skipped all of them, which he would later delete, but listen to the last one. Pete, Andrew said that Ricky would be there a couple of minutes before 6 tonight to apologize. I'm still not happy with you for putting me in this situation. We can talk about that after everyone leaves. Pete rolled his eyes. It was still somehow his fault. He was supposed to drive up to Louisville, Kentucky to lead an operations planning whiteboarding session for one of his clients all day Thursday and Friday morning. He decided that he would drive there tonight, after the apology, and arrive a couple of days early. He would absorb one hotel night himself and do some pre-work with the client in person on Wednesday. At 5:45 p.m., Brian and Carrie arrived. She gave Pete a big hug, and Brian shook his hand and said, well, this should be interesting. Are you and Joan okay? It sounded like this is putting you in a bad spot. Nothing to worry about. We will be. She's trying to wrap her head around her little husband beating up Great Big Ricky. Brian said, I'll admit that I'm a little surprised, too. Not so much that you did it, but how convincingly you did it. I guess I shouldn't have been. You've always seemed very prepared in everything you do. Thanks, Brian. Hopefully, Joan will remember that as well. If you don't mind, we'll wait out here, because I don't want that piece of shit in my house. I wouldn't either. A couple of minutes before 6 p.m., a red, two-door BMW pulled into their driveway. When Ricky got out, he was not wearing a happy face. Joan still hadn't arrived. He approached the three of them standing there and said, Carrie, I'm sorry about Saturday. I was out of line. I miss you and wanted us to go out again. I took your rejection poorly. I know we won't be going out anymore, but I hope I haven't destroyed our friendship.